The destruction of Metropolis is probably the most common argument you'll hear about Man of Steel. Did Clark do enough to stop Zod from wrecking everything? Did he even try? But remember that the movie doesn't really characterize Clark very well, and the director tends to skip over important details in storytelling. So we don't really know what Clark is thinking in all of this. We do know what he's not doing, though. He's not exactly going out of his way to save anyone. And that makes sense, because this scene was never intended to be characterization. It was always meant to just be destruction caused by a fight between two powerful characters.
I knew there'd be a lot of action in the movie, and I knew that we were going to see Superman fight.
So, you know what? I think by this point in the movie, this fight is really just the last straw for most people. Because if you think about it, Metropolis isn't even the worst example of Superman's reckless destruction. I think it's relatively innocent compared to the battle that takes place earlier in Smallville. Yeah, remember when Clark flies into Zod at high speed in a fit of rage, and drags him directly into the heart of downtown Smallville? Even more so than Metropolis, he's directly responsible for all of the death and destruction that results here. He drags Zod into a town full of innocent bystanders, and in doing so, passes by a huge empty crop field, one that's isolated out in the country with nobody around for miles, which would have been the perfect place for them to fight. That's actually even kinda worse than Metropolis. Don't get me wrong, the destruction of Metropolis is in no way innocent. Like, we're presented with a situation where the world engine is on the other side of the planet, while Zod's ship is going to town in Metropolis. Normally we would expect Superman to focus on Metropolis, because you'd think he'd want to save as many innocent people as he can, while the science team takes out the one on the other side of the planet. And in a better movie, that's what would have happened. Unfortunately, they're forcing the situation in such a way that Superman is given neither the motive or the opportunity to save anyone. The writing is so clearly robbing Clark of an opportunity to be a hero here that the audience just becomes frustrated again, rather than connecting with it. And what's up with this plan anyway, Zod? Like, take this so-called terraforming machine. Zod's goal is to change Earth so that it can support Kryptonian life, even though it already can, right? I mean, Jor-El sent Kal to Earth as a newborn baby. I don't think he would have done that if the baby couldn't survive. So, if a newborn can adjust to Earth's atmosphere without any medical intervention whatsoever, then there really is no good justification for doing this. You even get superpowers, Zod. It's win-win. I mean, probably it's not entirely clear how that works. Like, Clark loses his powers on the Kryptonian ship because it has a different atmosphere than Earth, but he seems just fine without an atmosphere when he's flying around in space. And then, to make this even more confusing, he loses his powers again on the ship when they, lock him in this red sun room. They even make a point of mentioning that. But then Jor-El floods the room with Earth's atmosphere, and he gets his powers back. This really doesn't need to be that complicated. Anyway, you can make all the excuses for this you want. Like, Zod doesn't want superpowers, he wants to recreate Krypton. For whatever reason, Mars won't work, even though the movie never makes any mention of that whatsoever. But if you look at this objectively, Zod is really just destroying Earth to spite Clark, because it gives them a reason to fight. But let's forget about all that for a moment, because the world engine itself is pretty questionable. Like, typically when we think about terraforming, we think of an inhospitable planet being made to support life, right? A planet like, say, Mars turned into a planet like, say, Earth. But isn't this machine just destroying the Earth? I don't think that's what terraforming means. Look at the aftermath of this thing. This whole area has now become an ashen, desolate, lifeless wasteland. All usable water is now polluted with debris. The sun would now become darkened or even blocked out by particulate in the air, which in turn would probably dramatically affect the ecosystem and lead to runaway climate change and extreme weather. How does that benefit New Krypton exactly? Don't you need food, water, clean air, and if you're gonna pollute the planet and destabilize its climate without superpowers, you'd be vulnerable to all of the new freak weather and freezing or boiling temperatures. I am 100% convinced that if this process were allowed to continue, Earth would just be destroyed. Isn't it interesting that several times the movie tells us that all of Krypton's colonies failed? Either abandoned for some reason because of population control, or they died off because they were cut off from the resources of Krypton. That doesn't make any sense. By all rights, there should be hundreds of planets, entirely populated by Kryptonians. Unless, of course, we take these world engines into account. then it starts to make perfect sense. It makes sense because these aren't terraforming machines, they're weapons of mass destruction. The Kryptonians are just really bad at terraforming. There is no attention to detail at all, just like vague notions that don't hold up to any level of scrutiny. Ugh, details, details, details. Oh hey, it's Lois again.
There's something wrong, it's not supposed to do this!
Because the plot isn't ready for it yet, stupid. You have to wait. Oh, there it goes. Sweet sciencey magic sucks in all the bad guys, except for Zod, which is a little suspicious. Like, think back to the first time you saw the movie. You might have noticed that we didn't see Zod getting pulled into the Phantom Zone, which obviously meant that he was going to show up again, right? It's like an action movie cliche. The bad guy shows up again at the last minute and the hero shoots him dead. So as a member of the Man of Steel audience, this begged the question, is this movie creative enough to solve this problem without killing Zod? Did you know that in the original plan for this movie, the final battle between Clark and Zod didn't even happen? That's true. Zod was just going to be sucked up into the Phantom Zone with the rest of them. Then cut to Clark at his father's grave, interning at the Daily Planet, and roll credits. But Zack Snyder's bloodlust was so strong that not even DC could hold him back. Snyder somehow convinced Goyer and Nolan to help him talk DC into letting Superman murder Zod. So eventually, DC responded with a mandate. Superman is allowed to kill Zod, but only if he has absolutely no other choice. Then the question you have to ask is, was it really believable that Clark had no other choice? No. The movie didn't really give him a convincing no-win scenario here. The execution of the scene was so lacking in build-up and character that the audience could see all kinds of practical solutions to this problem. Here's just a few off the top of my head. Point Zod's head up, because if you're strong enough to break his neck, you're strong enough to turn it. Point Zod's head down. Keeping Zod in a headlock, how about fly up, out of the building, away from the city, and back to that big empty field in Kansas? But if this problem had been set up in a believable way, we wouldn't be nitpicking like this. But it wasn't believable, because it was just rushed into the movie late game because Snyder changed his mind. Zod had to die, that was the only goal, the setup didn't matter. The original ending would have made more sense, and it would have flowed with the rest of the movie. But Snyder suddenly wanted this visual of Clark screaming like a savage and breaking Zod's neck, so the rest of that got thrown out, which broke the flow of the movie. As you can imagine, a lot of people have spoken out about this, including popular comic book personality and Marvel creative chief Joe Quesada, who, criticizing exactly this scene, said, "If you'd written a better problem, you could have had a better solution," which perfectly sums up just how poorly thought out this entire sequence was. But as always, rather than accept criticism, Snyder excuses all of this by saying that Zod had to die so that Clark had a reason not to kill anyone in the future. That this horrible event would be the turning point that changes him into the real Superman. Even though, having now seen Batman vs. Superman, we already know that this is a horseshit excuse. Don't get me wrong, I agree that Clark needs a reason not to kill. It's just that, while I think that reason should have been good characterization through various meaningful interactions, showing him to be a thoughtful and moral person, Snyder thinks that the only way to develop a character into someone who won't murder is by having him murder and then feel bad about it after. Which is probably the single stupidest defense people make for this movie. It's so easy to shoot down, I can do it in just a few questions. Question 1. Have you ever murdered someone? Question 2. If your answer to question 1 was no, then do you still understand that murder is bad? If so, congratulations, you're smarter than the writer of this movie. But extreme examples tend to illustrate philosophical issues best, so take Gandhi. As far as we know, he never killed anyone. And yet, he did a better job of preaching peace and nonviolent resistance than just about anyone else in human history, including all the people who have murdered before. So saying that Superman can only have a code against killing if he's already killed is like making an action movie where Gandhi takes up dual Uzis and starts shooting down oppressors of peace, only to then, after seeing all of the blood on his hands, finally become the Gandhi we know now.
Say what?
Is that really any less stupid if you apply it to Superman? But wait, you might say. Superman kills in the comics. You must not read the comics.
You serious?
Here we go. Way back in episode 1, I quoted Max Landis as saying that most people don't really understand what makes Superman special. So, yeah, Superman kills. He has killed. He will kill, given the right circumstances. But most people don't understand why. And in Man of Steel, this is the principal problem. I know, it seems like a subtle difference, but it's actually really simple. People often send me pictures of Superman killing as if to say, checkmate, as they proudly miss the point of what it is I'm saying. So, to address this, we have to get into the nitty-gritty of these examples and talk about what exactly is going on. First up, this one's pretty popular. I have to assume that the people who send me this picture just took like the first image result off of Google when they typed in Superman killing. They must have, because they obviously have no idea what the context is. This picture is from a video game called Injustice Gods Among Us. Or rather, a prequel comic that sets up a Mortal Kombat-style fighting game where Superman is the bad guy. Obviously, this is not our Superman. This is a bad guy from another universe. That is the point of the comic. So by quoting it, you're not making the argument you think you're making. So, could you at least try reading the comic before posting it out of context? Here's another popular example, the ending of Superman 2. Where Superman drops a depowered Zod down a hole, presumably killing him. I kind of already addressed this back in episode 1. That movie is not based on a specific comic, it's a movie that screws up the character too, so I don't see the logic in using it for justification in screwing up this one. Also, I guess there's an extended scene or something that shows Zod survived and gets arrested. In the end, it's Superman 2. Of course, the most common example people bring up is the death of Superman. Aha, you'll say, cutting me off. Superman and Doomsday fought in Metropolis, and Superman killed Doomsday after destroying half the city. My response is, that's true. But if you actually think about it, that's evidence against Man of Steel, not for it. Because Death of Superman was all about the setup. It was slowly and methodically built up with basically the entire Justice League fighting Doomsday for several issues. As Doomsday just tears heroes apart left and right, barely even slowing him down, Superman joins in, realizing they aren't enough. We see internal monologue from Superman showing that he has to leave some victims behind until it's safe to come back for them. He does this because he has to prioritize getting the monster away from them, which he does, and he goes back. He clearly cares, it's shown well. He's desperately trying to save as many lives as he can. It's very well characterized and directly discussed within the story. It shows Superman slowly building to desperation as he comes to his final conclusion. And because of this, the reader can empathize with them, as they realize they're staring down the barrel of a truly desperate situation. Remember DC's mandate of only if he has absolutely no other choice? Compare the lengths Death of Superman went to agree with that to what Man of Steel did. The difference is pretty clear. So, let's try taking a few ideas from these stories to change Man of Steel and bring it more in line. The fight starts. Zod tries to crash through a building full of people. We see Clark make eye contact with those people, and we see his reaction to their fear. Then we see Clark intentionally steer Zod away from them. Several of these kinds of moments would build upon this. Zod is frenzied. He picks up a car and throws it at a house. Via Clark's X-ray vision, we see people inside the house. Clark quickly catches the car, knocks Zod away from it, and again, clearly and intentionally saving innocent people. But before Superman can relax for even a moment, Zod is off to the next horrible thing. A child playing with their dog, a close call. A father walking with his son. Maybe he doesn't quite make it in time. But he keeps trying. He's trying to move faster and hit harder, but he's already starting to lose. He's losing because in my version, Zod would be an experienced military general who's fought using superpowers before, rather than this stupid scene where he's just described as being a quick learner. But if Zod won't stop and he's gone mad, we see the people being hurt. We see the consequences this violence has on them. This action means something. Clark slowly realizes it, and so does the audience. Zod has to be stopped. People are dying or in danger because Superman is not experienced enough to stop this threat. That hits home. That hits him hard. And that's how it has to go down. With this kind of characterization, the audience isn't irritated and angrily shouting at the screen, they're empathizing with Clark, especially when he ultimately and shamefully makes this personal sacrifice. Now you can talk about good coming out of this. That good would be a more experienced Superman, determined to never, ever let this kind of thing happen again. Isn't that better in every way than what Man of Steel did? Do you see how each moment builds upon the last? That's called storytelling. But Snyder expects us to believe this death had a huge impact on this character, that it changes him. But you know what kind of kills the impact of that? What ruins the supposedly painful and shameful act? Having Clark smile more after it happens than the rest of the movie combined. And that happens because this scene was shot for a different ending, and now it sticks out like a sore thumb. Clark's characterization is what should matter here. Build-up and care taken throughout the entire story would be needed to execute this scene in a meaningful way. Showing Clark is a thoughtful person of good moral character, rather than an apathetic, violent ape, which makes it seem like murder is just the first choice that pops into his head. This ending simply was not good enough. Occasionally someone will ask me what my thoughts on Batman vs Superman are, now that it's been released, and I think this question is a good way to lead into wrapping up this review. Because the thing is, there isn't that much to say about BVS that I didn't already say about Man of Steel. Pretty much all the same problems, just expressed in new ways. In other words, BVS was just the inevitable next step on the path that Man of Steel started us on. I will address one point about BVS though, like how people generally seem to have had trouble understanding Luthor's motivations, but it's clear to me that the reason this character is so frustratingly irrational and stupid is because he's a straw man. Think about it, he's an angry, hostile, violent, greedy, God-hating man who was abused by his father. That's what fundamentalist Christians think atheists are. That motivation is confusing to us because it's stupid, not because it's complicated and deep. Anyway, back to Man of Steel. It's not easy to express or sum up everything that's wrong with this movie, hence the 8-episode review. It's hard because Man of Steel isn't just a bad Superman movie, it's a movie that's bad in exactly the ways that a Superman movie needed to be good. It's gotta be the most backwards, ill-conceived, and misguided superhero movie ever made. It tries to be a darker take on Superman, drowning an icon of hope in this sea of tonal darkness, and mistakes that for realism. But do you think it was realistic? I don't. I think it's just cynical. But the kicker is, realism doesn't matter when it comes to Superman. There's a trick to Superman that only his fans understand. People say that his brand of old-school optimism just isn't the reality anymore, that the world doesn't work like that. But that means that they're completely missing the entire point of Superman. Because this was never reality. Superman's not about reality, he's about the future. He lives as though the world were what it should be, to show it what it can be. Because he's a dreamer.
If you think I'll just go to jail and rot, you're living in a dream world!
Good. Dreams save us. Dreams lift us up and transform us into something better. And on my soul, I swear that until my dream of a world where dignity, honor, and justice are the reality we all share, I'll never stop fighting. Ever.
But Man of Steel so blatantly ignores these kinds of defining stories that speak out against exactly this issue. Instead, it focuses on dark, one-off Elseworld interpretations. And it uses those as an excuse to justify this nonsense, saying that this is how he always was. Look, I don't care if you agree with Superman's philosophy. I don't even care if you like him. What I care about is that you understand him. This is what Superman is. Just let him be that. He doesn't work any other way. Don't twist him into your own personal pessimistic worldview, and then lie through your teeth and say that's what he's supposed to be. Show a little respect. This character has endured for so long because we find truth in him. Truth about ourselves, about our hopes and dreams for a better world. but what truth is there in Man of Steel? Man of Steel failed because it had all of the wrong people involved in its creation. A director who's not capable of accepting criticism and lashes out at anyone who dares question him, who claims to have reverence for these characters, but I see no evidence for that. And a writer with no respect for the genre, the character, the fans, or even good taste. All in a tone meant for a very specific version of a completely different character, and from a movie studio pushing some weird religious agenda. But thanks to BVS, people are finally starting to speak out against this. DC Rebirth is helping too, helmed by Geoff Jones. Even some pretty well-known YouTubers are speaking out against how broken this whole thing is. So my only question is, what the hell took so long? A lot of us saw this coming from the beginning.